Here's your script. Paragraph-wise English, based on real research into Windows 11's 2026 crisis. Now, one honest note before you use it. I searched extensively and found no verified statement from Bill Gates personally reacting to this. He's not involved with Microsoft's daily operations anymore. What's real is a much better story. Microsoft's own leadership publicly admitting Windows 11 is broken, a wave of documented crash-inducing updates in 2026, and a widely shared old Gates quote about keeping software simple that people are now using to slam Copilot's bloat. I built the script around that real angle. It's actually more powerful than a fabricated quote, and it won't get your channel flagged for misinformation. Somewhere inside Microsoft's Redmond campus, an engineer stared at a crash report that shouldn't have existed. Not a small glitch, not a rare edge case, a pattern repeating across thousands of machines, spreading faster than anyone could patch it, tracing back to the one feature Microsoft had bet its entire future on, artificial intelligence. The same AI Microsoft told the world would make Windows smarter, faster, more intuitive than ever. Instead, it was doing something nobody planned for. It was breaking the operating system from the inside. And the man whose name is still tied to the soul of Windows, Bill Gates, has spent years warning about exactly this kind of failure. Whether or not he's watching this unfold in real time, the warning he gave decades ago is now being thrown back at the company he built, and it's landing harder than anyone expected. Here's what most coverage isn't telling you clearly enough. This isn't a story about one bad update. This is a story about a strategy collapsing in slow motion in front of 1 billion users, while the company insists everything is fine. Let's go back to the beginning of this mess, because the roots run deeper than a single bug report. For the last several years, Microsoft made a decision that would define Windows 11's entire identity. Instead of doubling down on speed, simplicity, and reliability, the company pivoted hard into artificial intelligence. Copilot wasn't just an app anymore. It became an organism, embedded into nearly every corner of the operating system. The Start menu, the taskbar, File Explorer. Even Paint and Notepad, two of the simplest, most beloved tools in Windows history, were retrofitted with AI buttons nobody asked for. Paint, a program that used to just let you draw, started getting AI-generated coloring books bolted onto it. Notepad, a program that used to just let you type, got Copilot integration shoved into its corner. On paper, this looked like innovation. In practice, it became a warning sign that Microsoft had stopped listening to what people actually wanted from their computers. But here's where it gets worse. While Microsoft pushed AI features into every visible surface of Windows 11, the underlying plumbing of the operating system started to crack. Not metaphorically, literally. Core components that had worked reliably for years, the taskbar, the Start menu, File Explorer, began failing in ways users hadn't seen before. Not occasional hiccups, documented reproducible crashes. Users reported File Explorer becoming unresponsive mid-task. Taskbars freezing and reloading without warning. Systems stuttering the moment users tried to launch a game or a full-screen application. These weren't isolated complaints buried in a forgotten forum thread. They piled up across Microsoft's own feedback channels, independent tech communities, and enterprise IT departments simultaneously, all describing the same symptoms with eerie consistency. Think about what that means. When one person's computer glitches, that's a hardware issue. When thousands of people across different machines, different regions, different hardware configurations report the exact same failure pattern after the exact same updates, that's not bad luck. That's a systemic problem baked into the code itself. And this is where everything changes. In January 2026, the situation didn't just continue, it detonated. Microsoft's first Windows 11 update of the year turned into what insiders would later call an outright disaster. Shutdown failures started appearing across a wide swath of machines, forcing Microsoft into something companies desperately try to avoid, an emergency out-of-band patch, released outside the normal update cycle because the situation was too urgent to wait. That emergency patch was supposed to be the fix. It wasn't. Days later, Microsoft had to push a second emergency fix, this time targeting crashes tied to OneDrive and Dropbox, two of the most commonly used file syncing tools on the planet. Two emergency interventions in the span of days, not months. Days. Read that again. Two separate emergency patches were required just to stabilize the very first update of the year. If this were an isolated incident, Microsoft could have quietly moved on. It didn't get that luxury because what came next made January look like a warm-up. According to internal admissions later reported by The Verge, the crisis had grown severe enough that Microsoft's leadership could no longer deflect it with corporate language. Pavan Davuluri, the executive now overseeing Windows and devices at Microsoft, made a rare and startling admission. He confirmed that engineers were being redirected in an urgent internal process the company calls swarming, essentially an emergency mobilization where staff are pulled from other projects to attack the most severe reliability failures head-on. Davuluri didn't dress this up in typical corporate spin. His words were blunt, The feedback from users was clear, and Windows needed to improve in ways that were meaningful for people. That's not the language of a company confidently steering its ship. That's the language of a company admitting in public that the wheels were coming off. What most people are not seeing is how significant that admission actually is. Companies the size of Microsoft do not casually confirm internal crisis response protocols to the press. When a senior executive tells a major outlet that engineers are swarming to fix core reliability, that's not damage control. That's an acknowledgement that the damage has already been done, and the priority now is stopping the bleeding before it spreads further. But the bleeding didn't stop. It spread into March. Microsoft's March 2026 cumulative update, officially labeled KB50ZU79473, was supposed to be a routine security and quality patch, the kind that ships every month without headlines. Instead, it had triggered what can only be described as a second wave of instability, this time hitting a significant portion of the entire Windows 11 user base. Reports flooded in almost immediately after its release on March 10th. Crashes, application freezes, unexpected reboots that left people unable to reliably use their machines for work. One user, describing the chaos in a support forum, said their system had been rock solid for months, and after installing this single update, it began crashing at least twice a day, always seeming to happen in the middle of something important. Another user documented a specific failure chain. File Explorer becomes unresponsive first, and then the entire system locks up behind it. This is not chaos, this is a pattern. And patterns, in software engineering, always trace back to a decision somebody made. Microsoft did eventually acknowledge the KB507943 crisis and opened an investigation, collecting diagnostic data from affected users. But here's the detail that should concern anyone paying close attention. No fixed timeline was given, not within 48 hours, not by next week, nothing. Just an open-ended promise that they were looking into it, the same phrase companies use when they genuinely don't know how deep the problem goes. And just when it seemed like the story might quiet down, it escalated again in the worst possible venue imaginable. In late March 2026, Microsoft brought its AI-powered security platform to RSAC, the RSA conference, the single most important stage in the world for cybersecurity credibility. Microsoft had built its entire presence around a theme meant to project total confidence: AI as the new perimeter. The pitch was simple: trust Microsoft's AI to protect your organization better than anything that came before it. Then, during a live demonstration in front of industry professionals, the system Microsoft was using to prove that confidence crashed, not metaphorically crashed, literally displayed the Windows blue screen of death mid-presentation in front of the exact audience Microsoft needed to convince. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't a random consumer laptop glitching during a YouTube video. This was Microsoft's flagship AI security showcase at the most scrutinized security conference on the planet, failing in the most visually humiliating way an operating system can fail. The irony writes itself. A company trying to prove its AI could protect the world's most sensitive systems couldn't keep its own demo machine online for the length of a single presentation. Microsoft's team recovered professionally, rebooted, and continued. But recovery on stage doesn't erase what the room witnessed. It doesn't undo what got clipped, shared, and replayed across the tech industry within hours. The damage wasn't just technical, it was symbolic. And symbols, in a story about trust, matter more than any single bug fix ever could. Here's where the story pulls back for a moment, because context matters before the next escalation hits. Windows 11 by pure numbers has been a technical success. Microsoft confirmed the operating system crossed 1 billion active users faster than Windows 10 ever managed, a milestone that sounds like unquestionable victory. But growth numbers can hide a rotting core. Much of that adoption was accelerated not by enthusiasm, but by necessity. Windows 10's support window was closing, forcing millions of users onto Windows 11 whether they wanted to be there or not. Reaching 1 billion users while your own engineering leadership is publicly swarming to fix basic reliability isn't triumph. It's proof that scale and quality had become two completely separate conversations inside the same company. And that disconnect is exactly what's fueling the backlash spreading across tech communities right now. According to informed reporting inside the Windows enthusiast ecosystem, the Windows Insider program, originally created after the disastrous Windows 8 launch specifically to rebuild trust with the community, now feels hollow. Core team members who once represented the human face of that trust-building effort have quietly moved to different roles. The program that was supposed to be Microsoft's early warning system, its direct line to the people actually using Windows every day, has become, in the words of insiders, faceless. Think about the message that sends. The safety net designed to catch these exact failures before they reach the public has itself been allowed to thin out right as the failures multiply. This is where everything connects, and this is where it gets genuinely uncomfortable for Microsoft. Because now there's competition circling, and it's not the competition Microsoft is used to fighting. Reports tracking desktop operating system usage show something that would have sounded absurd a decade ago. Linux, long dismissed as a niche hobbyist system, has crept back up toward roughly 4% market share, and it's trending upward while macOS trends downward in comparison. 4% might sound small, but the direction of that line matters more than the number itself. Every frustrated IT administrator who switches a fleet of machines away from Windows, every developer who gets tired of fighting update-induced crashes and migrates to a Linux distribution instead, adds momentum to a story Microsoft desperately does not want written. That its own reliability failures are what's pushing users toward the exit, not competitors out-innovating them. And this is where the Bill Gates angle becomes impossible to ignore, even without a single new quote from him. Years ago, Gates described his philosophy for great software in words that read almost like a prophecy today. He said the finest software comes from someone who has a complete sense of exactly how the program works, someone who loves it enough to keep it simple, to an incredible degree. Simplicity, in Gates's vision, wasn't a lesser goal. It was the entire point. It was the discipline that separated software people trusted from software people merely tolerated. Now look at what Windows 11 has become. Copilot in Edge, Copilot in the Start menu, Copilot creeping toward the taskbar, AI buttons wedged into Paint and Notepad, tools that were beloved specifically because they never tried to be anything more than what they were. The philosophy Gates once described as the foundation of great software has been buried under feature after feature that nobody asked for and increasingly nobody trusts. What most people are not seeing is that this isn't really a story about artificial intelligence being bad technology. It's a story about a company chasing a narrative, the AI narrative, at the direct expense of the exact principle its own co-founder once said mattered most: simplicity, reliability, the feeling that one person, one team, truly understood the program from top to bottom. Instead, users describe an operating system that feels bloated, unpredictable, and increasingly at war with itself. And the consequences of that shift are no longer theoretical. They're measurable and they're accelerating. Consider April 2026. Just weeks after the RSAC embarrassment, Microsoft released another cumulative update, KB5083769, meant to serve as the month's core security baseline for Windows 11 24H2 and the newly rolling out 25H2. Within days, Microsoft's own support forums lit up with a new and more disturbing failure pattern. Not simple freezes this time, boot loops. Pixelated, mosaic-like screens appearing before a crash, systems attempting to recover, failing, and looping back into the same broken state over and over, trapping users in what the community started calling a death loop, a phrase that should terrify any company trying to convince the world its AI can be trusted with critical infrastructure. Multiple documented cases spanned different hardware manufacturers entirely. HP desktops, Dell desktops, machines inside the same company experiencing identical symptoms. That detail matters enormously. When failures cluster around a single brand, you can point to a hardware quirk. When failures span completely different manufacturers after the exact same update, the problem almost certainly lives inside the update itself, likely somewhere deep and boot critical. Firmware interaction, the storage stack, or a kernel-level driver conflict. None of those are minor. All of those sit at the foundation layer of how a computer starts up and stays alive. This is where the stakes stop being about inconvenience and start becoming something closer to a trust collapse. Because here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. Windows 11 isn't just an operating system anymore. It's critical infrastructure for hospitals, financial institutions, government agencies, schools, and hundreds of millions of households who have no backup plan if their primary machine fails. A death loop bug isn't just an annoyance for a home user restarting their laptop. In an enterprise environment, it means locked out employees, stalled operations, emergency help desk tickets multiplied across hundreds or even thousands of machines simultaneously, and in the worst cases, the need to fully re-image and restore entire fleets of computers just to get back to a working baseline. And this is precisely why Microsoft's public tone shifted so dramatically by early 2026. The company that had spent years marketing Windows 11 around the promise of AI transforming how people use their computers suddenly found itself publishing an entirely different message, a pledge to slow down feature development and refocus on speed, reliability, and giving users back a sense of control. Machine learning models, ironically, are now being deployed internally to analyze crash reports and telemetry data, hunting for the very patterns of failure that AI-driven feature bloat helped create in the first place. Microsoft is even developing performance profiles designed to automatically dial back AI features on lower-end hardware, essentially building a system to protect users from the very features the company spent years aggressively pushing into every corner of the interface. Think about what that says. The fix for AI breaking Windows is now in part more AI. deployed specifically to detect and dial back the damage caused by earlier AI. That's not innovation moving forward. That's a company patching its own philosophy in real time, in public, while millions of users watch their machines crash in the meantime. So where does that leave the people actually sitting in front of these machines every single day? Frustrated mostly, and increasingly resourceful in ways that shouldn't be necessary on a mature billion-user operating system. Communities have started building their own survival tactics, delaying non-security updates for weeks after release just to let early adopters absorb the risk first, running third-party stability tools designed to monitor system health and intercept certain crash triggers before they cascade, manually disabling AI features they never wanted in the first place, just to reclaim system resources, and creating recovery images before applying any significant update, treating every patch Tuesday like a potential threat rather than routine maintenance. Here's the deeper problem buried inside all of that. Users shouldn't need to become amateur system administrators just to keep a mainstream consumer operating system stable. The fact that an entire ecosystem of workaround culture has emerged around Windows 11 tells you everything about how far trust has eroded. When your user base collectively decides that waiting weeks before installing an official security update is safer than installing it on release day, that's not caution. That's an indictment. And the real story, the one hiding underneath all the individual crash reports and bug tickets, is about power, about who actually controls the experience of using your own computer. Microsoft has made local accounts increasingly difficult to create, nudging nearly everyone toward mandatory Microsoft accounts during setup. Ads have crept into the Start menu. Defaults have been engineered to keep users inside Microsoft's ecosystem, even when better tools exist elsewhere. Each of these choices, taken alone, seems minor. Taken together, they paint a picture of a company optimizing for engagement and ecosystem lock-in first, and user trust is an afterthought. This is not chaos. This is strategy. A strategy that prioritized AI headlines, ecosystem control, and engagement metrics over the boring, unglamorous work of making an operating system simply, reliably work. And now that strategy is colliding in real time with the exact principle its own founder once said mattered more than anything else in software: simplicity, driven by someone who deeply understands and loves the program they're building. Whether Bill Gates himself has said a single word about any of this recently almost doesn't matter anymore. The internet has already made the connection for him. His decades-old words about simplicity are being quoted back at the company he co-founded, not as nostalgia, but as an accusation. And accusations like that don't fade quietly. They compound, especially when every new update seems to prove the critics right before the news cycle even has time to move on. So the real question isn't whether Microsoft can patch KB 5083769, or stabilize the next cumulative update, or quietly walk back a few AI features nobody wanted. The real question is whether an operating system that reached 1 billion users through obligation rather than admiration can rebuild something it may have already lost along the way. Whether swarming engineers can outfix a strategy that keeps generating new failures faster than old ones get resolved. Whether users who've already started building workaround cultures, delaying updates, disabling AI features, quietly testing Linux on a second machine, ever fully come back once they've learned they don't have to depend on Windows working the way it used to. Microsoft says it's listening now. Microsoft says the priorities are shifting back toward reliability. But promises like that have been made before, and each new crash report, each new boot loop, each new emergency out-of-band patch chips away a little more at how much anyone is willing to believe them. The uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire saga is simple. Trust, once fractured at this scale, doesn't come back with a single update. It comes back, if it comes back at all, one flawless month at a time. And Microsoft hasn't strung together very many of those in 2026. What happens next depends on a decision nobody outside Redmond gets to make. Does Microsoft actually pull back from the AI-first strategy that triggered this crisis? Or does it simply slow the pace while quietly continuing the same push under a different name? Does the next cumulative update finally break the cycle? Or does it become the next headline in a story that's already repeated itself 4 times this year? And if the operating system running on 1 billion machines can't guarantee something as basic as a clean shutdown or a working file explorer, what does that say about every larger promise built on top of it? The AI security platforms, the enterprise trust, the vision of a smarter, more capable Windows that started this entire chapter in the first place. Nobody at Microsoft is answering that question publicly yet, which might be the most telling silence in this entire story.